Welcome to In Conservation, a podcast of the Wildlife Trust for Bedfordshire, Cambridgeshire and Northamptonshire. I'm Sophie Baker, editor of our members magazine Local Wildlife and host of the podcast. In this episode, I travelled to our Ramsey Heights Nature Reserve at the Great Fen to chat to team members Lorna and Alison about the people-focused work of our Peatland Progress project. The Great Fen is a huge, long-term, landscape-scale wetland restoration project, now 25 years in, and I wanted to find out more about how it affects the people who use and appreciate it. From youth groups to contractors, scientists to local farmers, it's a true living landscape, and the Great Fen team are passionate about making sure as many people as possible get the chance to experience this expansive, flat and magical fenland. The word amazing crops up a lot in this episode, and that's because this place really has achieved so much. And it promises to achieve so much more for the wildlife and people that live there, as well as for our understanding about what a project like this can achieve in terms of climate mitigation and habitat regeneration. It's a truly spectacular place. Here we are at the Great Fen. It's a beautiful sunny day. We're sitting in a beautiful wooden structure, which I guess you use for a lot of engagement with people, and groups come here and use it. And we're here to talk about the Peatland Progress project, which is the newest phase, was that the right way of saying it, of the Great Fen project as a whole?
Indeed. Next exciting chapter.
Next exciting chapter, that's brilliant. And could you just explain for anyone who might not know what the Great Fen project is?
Okay, so the Great Fen project is a landscape scale project to join up to really fantastic nature reserves, which were like little islands in the farmland, and make a massive wetland where everyone can come and enjoy new wildlife spreading out.
Yeah, brilliant. That's a very succinct way of saying it. And what is actually Peatland Progress within that project? Is it an extension? Is it within it? How do you sort of think about Peatland Progress in relation?
Well, that's the most exciting new chapter of what we're doing at the Great Fen, and we try and explain it to people as filling in the missing piece of the jigsaw. So we've done a lot of work to expand the two national nature reserves which are here at the moment, but we had a farm in between that was still growing commercial food. And that farmer decided to retire and sell us the land, and that's meant that we can join up all the land that we're restoring to date to make a massive area for the first time.
Wow.
And Peatland Progress is the way we've packaged up that joining of the jigsaw, and it's being funded by the National Lottery Heritage Fund with a lot of money and a lot of enthusiasm for exciting new things. But it's not just about the land, is it?
No. Obviously, through the project, we'll be engaging with different communities and young people. So we have a particular targeted area of 11 to 25-year-olds that we're working with. So that will include us working with secondary schools in the area to improve biodiversity on their school grounds. We'll be working with different local community groups to come over here and have activity and experiences here out in the Great Fen. We're also going to be delivering youth workshops where they can learn new skills and meet other like-minded young people. Everything with the centre of health and well-being being at the centre of what we're doing. It's very important how young people feel and that connection to nature. And we're also doing things like on-site therapy, which has been going really, really well. Is giving young people the opportunity to receive therapy through nature, through walks with a therapist, which they find is much more productive than potentially sitting in a room with a therapist. So lots of different things going on here, plus traineeships and internships for young people being able to get some experience working at the Trust.
So I'm Lorna Parker. I'm the Great Fen Restoration Manager. I will have worked for the Wildlife Trust for 25 years next month, which is a bit of a major milestone, on nature reserves and then more latterly at the Great Fen. And I work with a fantastic, enthusiastic team of people who are delivering all of the good things that we do, from making new wildlife habitat to engaging all these people and all sorts of things in between that we never ever dreamed of going into.
Yeah, brilliant.
So I'm Alison Chaves, and I'm the Great Fen Communities and Education Manager. And my role really, I've kind of got a few different hats in the fact that I'm the site manager for Ramsey Heights, so I work on community and engagement here. And our age range could be anything from 0 to 100 of the visitors and the outreach that we do and facilitate from Ramsey Heights. And then on the other side, I work as the Peatland Progress Communities and Education Lead. Again, as we said earlier, like working with the target for audience is 11 to 25-year-olds and all the different things we can offer there with wellbeing and mental health being at the centre of all of the activities we're going to provide. And I love it. I haven't been here that long, but I do love my job, and I feel like there's so much purpose in what we're doing, and to feel like there's so much we are doing that's on people's doorsteps that they don't realise to help with things like climate change mitigation. And I find that really powerful when talking to young people to say, you're really worried about these things. And here I'm a bit of a stubborn, optimistic person that, the things that we're doing are making a difference and it's real. So come along and listen. And that's kind of my message, is to come along and see what we're doing, come along and get a feel for it.
And I think the thing that I love about the Wildlife Trust is that, it's easy to say all these things and to have a project about people, but it's also underpinned by so much kind of evidence-based work. There's a whole team, a whole trust of people who are kind of working at every level, aren't they? That kind of the monitoring and research that goes on, the management plans that you have to do in terms of bringing back the wildlife and monitoring that and making sure it's happening, and then using that information and that knowledge to actually, like you say, tell people about it and explain and show people,
And not just that, it's actually like, this is what you can do. It's actually feeling confident that we're doing something rather than sort of preaching. We feel like we can actually say, well, this is what the trust is doing. This is amazing. Here's what you can do to also help. And the ripple effects can come in different directions, of children attending to go home to tell their families, and then, going out to businesses, and then the businesses taking that home to their families. So the ripple effects can sort of really be everywhere. And I think it's us just saying, even the smallest things you can do are going to make a huge difference. We're doing this, it's quite large scale, but actually even the smaller things will all add up and make a difference. And I think that's a really important message too.
Yeah, absolutely. And how big is the Great Fen?
So we have our sort of project boundary, our dream area, which is 3,700 hectares or 15 square miles, if that means more to people. Probably not, but pretty massive. And we own just over half of that now. We have it in restoration, so on its journey towards being something fantastic. And not all of it's wetland yet. So lots of people come here expecting to find a whole wetland landscape already, but the journey is a long one, and the project is a 100-year vision. That said, we have got some amazing wet bits too, with lots of wildlife on. So there's lots to see if people come here.
Yeah, and you say wet bits. I think I hear sometimes people talking about, the restoration of Whittlesea Mere and the kind of ancient lake, and how it's going to, well, not ancient, but, the lake that used to be here, and everyone sort of being alarmed by the fact that we're going to reflood the whole place and make it into a big lake. But that's not true, is it? I mean, that's not really what's going on.
No, it's not. But that was a genuine concern of people when the project started.
Yeah.
And we had those discussions with folk about what we intended to do with the landscape. You're right, there was a mere here that was the largest lake in lowland England, and it had sailing regattas, and it was the hub of the local economy for fishing and all sorts of things. And that's kind of ancient history around here now. And it's quite interesting that the mere itself, or the place where it used to be, is actually higher than the surrounding land because of the way the soil behaves. So even if we had wanted to recreate the mere, we couldn't have done it. But actually, when we talk about wet bits, we're talking about holding on to the rain that falls from the sky in the soil to protect the soil. And then incidentally, that makes really good habitat for things like wading birds to come and poke around looking for worms and things, and all sorts of wetland plants and insects as well.
Yeah, amazing. And so much of it is open to people. I mean, or I imagine community groups and the people that you're bringing here, that's... some of it won't be, I suppose. Some of it's grazed, is that right? So there's some of it's closed off for wildlife and things, but there's still a lot to experience.
Yeah, so we did a lot of work at the start looking at how people would use the site and wildlife, because it's really, really important to get people to the heart of what we're doing. But we have some wildlife that really doesn't appreciate being close to people. So it's about finding that balance. So we've got some areas where people can view from the side. So we've got a really cool tower hide you can go to see for miles across the project, but you can't get to the wildlife. You just look at it from afar. And then fantastic places like where we are here at Ramsey Heights, where you can really get into what's going on, even get your fingers in the dirt in the mud kitchen here, and really, really get close to nature too.
Yeah, and I bet people really appreciate that getting close. I mean, in your experience, like, have you had any kind of particular experiences where, you know, you've seen somebody's eyes light up and they're kind of, you know, have you had that? Have you seen that?
I think that we have a lot of mixed groups here, so you hear different stories. You'll hear people who come over here with the schools saying, you know, they've brought family over here for generations and they love coming here, and they even joke and say that when their friends turn up, they have wellies at the ready to come down to Ramsey Heights and have a walk round because they love it here, and that contact of what it means to them here. And then you've got the other extreme where you have schools coming over from places like Peterborough, where some of them don't really have a lot of contact necessarily with nature. They may live in sort of more urban areas and live in flats and different things like that, and school doesn't particularly have great school grounds, so the children come over here it's quite a nice thing to see, but a sad thing at the same time, seeing their faces kind of really overwhelmed with what's going on here during the day, and you know, by the time they leave, and that knowledge they've taken is just really nice. And also the same with some of the community groups from Peterborough, you know, having them here. I think we had an event where they came last year, came over and they learnt about the animals of the Great Fen. And then this year they came and they quickly remembered, they were reciting to us already, you know, that they remembered what we told them, which animals lived here. And that was really great to see that they'd remembered the names of some of the creatures that lived here. So there's lots of different experiences. And our youth forum love coming here. They do like Strawberry Hill as well, obviously, but they're two extremes of different places. I think I think people would kind of class this as something very local, a very good community spirit here, based at Ramsey Heights, because they join in the activities and come with the school groups and things. So it's really nice to hear.
Yeah, nice. It's kind of integrated into people's lives in a way.
Yeah,
yeah,
so that's
absolutely.
nice to hear.
Yeah, and I have to say, I mean, I've driven over from St Neots today, and even the change from, I mean, St Neots isn't a hilly place by any means.
It's all relative.
It's all relative. But even coming from somewhere like that, you know, and kind of meeting the expanse of the fens, and suddenly it kind of, the sky opens up around you, you know, it is quite an astounding experience, actually. And I think, you know, it's easy to think that everyone in Cambridgeshire knows about that, because it's such a kind of Cambridgeshire idea, you know, the idea of the Cambridgeshire Fens. But obviously we cover Bedfordshire and Northamptonshire as well, and I bet there's a lot of people who are members who might never have been here, and you know, it's what would you say to persuade them to come here that you haven't already?
We've talked a lot to people to find out what they value about coming here and what they find special. And the consistent theme is of space and space away from other people. So that kind of that connection. And lots of people talk about the sound of the wind in the reeds and that kind of way of getting away from everything and just being at one with yourself and nature. So that's something that, as we sort of increase the opportunity for people to come here, that we never want to lose. We always want to make a space where you could go for a walk and not see anybody else.
Yeah, and it's a big enough space. It feels like that's quite, you know, that is achievable. You know, not necessarily easy to achieve, but achievable, isn't it? It's...
I think it's probably true for you as well, Alison. But I find it a really important part of my job to meet people out on site about what we're doing, because we could make a fantastic wetland nature reserve and never see a member of the public. We could do it, but it wouldn't be the same. And I don't think we personally would get as much out of it either, because you meet people and you get their perspective and they remind you again and again about how amazing this is, how exciting it is. So I remember taking a group of sixth form students out to show them some land we'd restored, and we'd come to talk to them about wetland and what we do as a wildlife trust. But behind us was a field of potatoes, and I made some throwaway comment about the farmer would be harvesting the potatoes next week, and it turned out that none of those children knew the potatoes grew in the soil. Wow. So we stopped what we were doing and we talked about that instead. And it just felt, for me, it was a good reminder that not everybody's coming from the same place, but also actually every visit could make a difference, a significant difference in people's lives.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Wow, that's amazing, isn't it, to think that? Like you say, it's easy to forget from your own perspective that people don't come from the same perspective.
No.
That's an obvious thing, but it's not really, is it? It's that's amazing. So, Lorna, you work with a lot of people in relation to the site as well. So, as well as the community engagement, obviously, you work with contractors, and as part of your job, there's a huge range of people, isn't there? And you've had some interesting meetings, I think, with some thatchers, is that right? And people like that, the sort of different trades and tradespeople.
That's right. So, a big kind of thread of what we're doing in recent years is helping to trial a new form of farming, which looks at crops which can grow with a high water table in the soil. And different uses for those crops. So that's how we sort of ended up connecting with the thatchers, because obviously they're interested in reed, which can grow in wet conditions. And so looking at reed, not just as a habitat, but as a potential crop. We hosted a day where they came here to tell us all there was to know about thatching and reed, where it comes from and what they need. That's been really interesting. So that's something you're hoping in the long run we could bolster a local reed industry again, which would be a fantastic bit of heritage brought back to life.
Yeah.
But equally, we have a policy of trying to use local contractors and supporting the local economy. So we've got lots of what have become friends as well as contractors, people we know well in the area that we can, with local knowledge, which is really great. We also meet all sorts of farmers and policymakers from all sorts of walks of agricultural life, where we can spread the word about what we're doing, trying to inspire them to do either wet farming or just making space for wildlife on their farms and in their policies too.
Yeah, because obviously farming is the new sort of thing about, I say new in terms of historical, not new as in brand new, but it's something that people associate with Fenland, isn't it? The sort of peaty soils and all the farming. And, it's, even though the Great Fen Project is a big space in that 3,700 hectares, is that what you said?
That's right, yep.
That it's not at all the whole of the fens, and there are farmers around all of that, aren't there? So engaging with them must be really important.
It is, and then there's that balance. We all need to eat. And these fen farmers are absolutely fantastically efficient at growing food, but that's not sustainable in the long run because they lose soil every year through the process of farming. And when the soil's gone, they then can't farm. So we all collectively, regardless of why we want to protect the soil, need to be doing that job and finding alternative ways of growing food materials. So that's what we're working with them to do. But across a wider region, because, as you say, it's a massive climate change concern because of the amount of carbon that's released into the atmosphere.
Yeah, it's a huge percentage, isn't it, of the overall carbon cost of Cambridgeshire. Is that right?
50% of the emissions from Cambridgeshire come from the farmed peat.
Wow.
And it was only recently that the kind of local authorities actually factored that into their calculations. Before that, it was all the usual kind of things you think of when you think of emissions, sort of like you transport or that kind of thing. And then suddenly they put the farming calculation in, and I think it shocked, most people really, the amount of emissions. Because people don't think about soil disappearing. You drive past a field and you see soil in it, and the next year you still see soil in it. Yeah. We know from our measurements that soil's lost at about an inch a year.
Wow. Yeah, that's amazing. And it's it makes you, when you're driving around, it must be when you're driving people around as well who've never been before. It is strange when you're driving on the roads, and the roads are so much higher than the kind of farmland around you. I mean, and is that a product of that kind of soil loss?
Exactly. Yeah. So a lot of those roads are built on historical routes where the roads have always been, and the farmland falls away. And lots of people don't even realise we've got rivers, because the rivers are all metres and metres higher than the farmland they're draining. So we have a whole...
That's amazing.
Yeah, we have this whole system where the ditches carry the water to pumps, and then the pumps have to pump it up into the river. And then actually it goes down the river and it's pumped up twice more before it gets out to the sea. So I always say to people, it's like we're in the bottom of the bathtub here. We're at the low point, and then that's how the system operates.
Yeah, that is amazing. I mean, that must be quite a tale to tell to people when you're kind of engaging with young people and things.
Yeah, no, definitely. And then sort of saying, you're standing in one of the lowest parts and things like that of the UK, and I think they find that fascinating. Had no idea. So, yeah, they have a concept of that.
Young people at the heart of the Peatland Progress project, as you said, 11 to 25, it's such a key age range, isn't it? That's of people who are just really inspired and motivated to make things happen, positively for the environment. And that's the thing I think is amazing about the Great Fen, because it's about the wildlife and the amazing wildlife that you can see and the habitats, but also there's a lot of research and work that you're doing in terms of the science of carbon capture, isn't there? And kind of exploring all of that stuff that's going on as well.
Yeah, we're doing lots of, it's important not just to do it, but to understand that it's working and to be able to show others that it's working in the hope that they will adopt it, and it will not just be what we can do on our land, but changing hearts and minds and influencing behaviour across the region, really. Anywhere with peat, we'll go and talk to people about their peat. But it's more than that, because Peatland Progress is got a dimension where we want to expand that message outwards. So we've got part of the project called Science into Stories, and it's about taking that quite technical carbon information and finding new ways to explain to people actually what it's about in new languages that we're not expert in. So we're hoping to have poetry and stories and performance and art and different ways of reaching people. Because one of the things we found through our work previously is that you can reach a whole different section of people who didn't even know that they would be interested in what we were doing until you meet them in their place that they're passionate about. And I think it never got shown better than when we helped with the Spitfire excavation on site as part of our last major project of works, which obviously I wasn't an expert in, but turned out to be a massive project that really touched people's hearts actually across the country.
Yeah, and what was that project? So there was a Spitfire actually in the peat, is that right?
There was. So there was a test pilot, had unfortunately had an accident and crashed his Spitfire on the way back from a training mission. And we were approached by an archaeological recovery interest group. Could they have permission to take the Spitfire out, please? And we said, well, hang on a minute, we need to understand more about this. We're very good at getting in depth into things and making the most of the opportunities. And actually, what started off as a sort of quick inquiry turned into a multi-agency project where we worked on bringing up the Spitfire, and they generated a new way of doing archaeology, aviation archaeology, which was an exemplar for the UK, so more like a time team dig, with where you kind of go through the layers and you map what's going on and you scan it, and then we took it all away and learned about it, which meant that not only did they connect with local people who'd seen it crash and the family of the pilot and things, but they also had this new way of working, and they'd even discovered all the evidence of what happened in the recovery. So when the plane crashed initially, they had come to recover the pilot and things, and the whole expedition of coming to do that on that horrible dark wet night was kind of revealed through this process, and the whole story could be told, which is completely not what wildlife conservation is about. But there was a whole sector of the local population who suddenly kind of interacted with us and got to know us, and it was just nothing but positive.
Yeah, it's amazing. There's a lot of information about that on the Great Fen website, isn't there?
Yeah, there's even a documentary, isn't there?
Yeah. So if you're more interested in that, podcast listeners, then do go and have a look. It's greatfen.org.uk is the website. Do go and have a look. It's a really fascinating piece of the Great Fen project. Here's a little aside, just for you. One reason our 3 counties are a special place for wildlife. BCN Beauties.
Hello, my name's Gwen Hitchcock, and I'm a Senior Monitoring Research Officer at the Wildlife Trust for Beds, Camps and North Hants. I work with volunteers monitoring one of our rarest mammals, the hazel dormouse. Being small and nocturnal, they're pretty elusive, spending their summers in the trees and their winters hibernating. Hence their sleepy reputation, notable in the Suffolk nickname Sleep Meese and the narcoleptic depiction at Alice in Wonderland's Tea Party. They almost have a very precise habitat requirement, and that makes them a great indicator species for wider plant and animal diversity in our woodlands. So we know that where we have dormice, we have good quality habitat for everything else. And these wonderful animals used to be fairly widespread and common in England and Wales, but they suffered huge declines over the last century due to changes in land management practices. Despite being protected now, their decline has continued, with the population falling by a staggering 70% since 2000. And since Victorian times, they've been lost from 20 counties. And the reasons for this continued decline are habitat loss and degradation, but the problems ought to be compounded by climate change. But all is not lost. A lot of effort is being put into understanding and reversing this decline. So Cambridgeshire is one of the counties from which they were lost. And around 30 years ago, in 1993, the first captive bred dormice were reintroduced to the county at our very own Brampton Wood Nature Reserve. Since then, the population has increased and spread throughout the wood and into the surrounding hedgerows. But despite the good hedgerow linkages, there are no neighbouring dormouse populations for them to mix with, and this has left them genetically isolated. So in 2023, we worked with the People's Trust for Endangered Species and introduced 7 new individuals from the National Captive Breeding Programme to improve the genetic diversity of our population, making it stronger and better equipped to face whatever climate change throws at them next.
We're at a really exciting point in the Peatland Progress project, aren't we? Because I know there's been some delays to some of the work that's had to start in terms of the restoration. But it's kind of, you're getting started. How long has it been now? I can't remember since the funding was actually.
Well, we bought
released.
the land. We bought that missing piece of the jigsaw in April 2023.
That's right. Speechless Farm.
That's right, and that had, the farmer that sold it had a crop on it, so you have to wait for the final harvest, which was quite poignant, I think. I actually got to go out and have a ride on some of the machinery while they were harvesting the last of the crop.
Wow.
Actually, people can see a video of it on our YouTube channel, I think. And then we've sort of had this interim period where we stabilise the soil by sowing grass, because actually if you don't, it can blow away. And then we're doing all sorts of planning work and working out what we can do and the best way of doing it so that we can make a fantastic wetland across that whole area, which we're hoping to start next year.
Yeah. And how will the people engagement that you're doing, Alison, how will that change, do you think, when the work actually, is more visible, I suppose? There's a lot of work going on, obviously, but when it becomes that kind of visible on the ground, when, reeds are more visible and the wildlife starts coming back, obviously we're not talking a couple of months' time, but, when that, do you think that will change how these groups interact with the space?
I think so, and I think we've talked about this a lot lately is in terms of transformational journeys. It's actually, is at the heart of what we do with the trust, creating those living landscapes and habitat and creating habitats. And I think, this whole, like you said, the whole before and after journey of people seeing what the journey that the land's gone through. I think that people then are really invested in that. They understand that transition, but I think they're really invested in before, after, and then when the wildlife moves in, that whole journey. And I'm hoping that what we can have is a bit of repetition, especially with schools and things like that, where they can come over and sort of see it before, then kind of come over and see it after and understand what it is we're doing. And I think you said earlier, what's hard is to get people to visualize. Like, we go out and do a lot of presentations and we show the map and but to show the scale and actually the reality of what's happening on the ground is quite hard to do in a presentation. So hence, like Lorna said, it's like having people come out and actually see it, in real life. What's that transitional journey?
Yeah.
It's amazing.
I mean, we work out there day in, day out, and still every day you go out and you think this is huge. This is huge. Or you'll see a species that we haven't had before on site will suddenly fly across in front of you while you're going somewhere, and it takes your breath away, because it's very easy to get focused on the day-to-day details of what you're doing, or the challenging parts of what you do that maybe aren't quite working how you'd like, and then occasionally you just think, oh, this is where we want to be, this is amazing. It really lifts your spirit, doesn't it?
Yeah,
kind of
I think you recently had an osprey, and we had a bit of a joke because we were meeting with Northumberland Wildlife Trust, who was saying that, we just recently had some ospreys, but now they've gone. And I said, well, I think they're down with us, because they've just popped up in the Great Fair. We have an osprey come through, and I like that whole link of potentially they've gone from one reserve up there down to us here in the Great Fair, which is quite nice. Different species coming around.
Yeah, that is amazing. I just find it so, a project like this is really shows what the Wildlife Trust can do, a Wildlife Trust can do, and what our Wildlife Trust does, in terms of people. There's just such a huge number of people involved, aren't there, from just every kind of, every walk of life, from the kind of ground, from the people driving tractors, to the contractors, all the way through to people coming and, like you were saying earlier, having counselling here, and I just think, it's just amazing, the broad spectrum of people that our work can reach and have an effect.
I think it's getting us away from that preconception that we're an animal rescue charity and people are understanding more and more what it is. So when we're talking about transformation, I think it's really important that people understand the extent of what we're doing, because we put lots of nice images and we have lots of wildlife living on our sites, but actually those whole transformational images of what's happened before and after is really, really amazing. And it's important for people to understand what it is we do, and there's lots of people busy working away doing these transformations.
Yeah. But also transforming themselves though as well. I mean, I think that's the thing, isn't it? A lot of the work that you do is about kind of initiating a transformation in people's understanding or in their own mental health. I mean, I just think it's so important and vital, isn't it? And we never you don't necessarily find out how you've touched people's lives. Sometimes we're lucky enough to get that insight, and it might not be till 10 or 15 years after that time where you said that one thing that inspired them. But I know that we've had people on training, like voluntary wardens, so they spend 6 months of a year with us getting on the job training, and then they disappear off into employment, and we feel great for them that they've got a job. But some of those people have gone off to be like international policy experts on conservation. You think a little part of that was, we set them on that journey, and that is making a difference across the world now. And it's just fantastic, isn't it? Yeah. Do you have any top stories of people that you feel have been touched by what you've done here, Alison?
I think, and obviously we work with the Youth Forum, and I see the progress in their confidence all the time, amazing. And I think, the work that they're doing as their own little projects outside of the trust, and they bring all that information back. And we recently had one of our forum members, he was down in London with the March for Water, and he, watching the video last night, he's there presenting, and he says he thinks that about 15,000 people were there on this march, and he's there with Liz Bonin behind him, he's the president of our Wildlife Trust, and he's doing this great speech next to Parliament, and you just think, wow, they're going from strength to strength, and hopefully, like you said, part of that is us giving them a platform belonging to our Wildlife Trust Forum to give them the confidence that they can go out there and make a stand, themselves, but also supporting the work that we do. And, you see that growth in them all of the time. So I think that's really impactful. And again, like say some of these groups coming out, these schools and things, seeing the difference in the children by the time they leave. And, I recently did been training for my forest school qualification, and been having a group of students, older students from a college, and even in the 6 weeks, just having them here on a reserve, working in nature, making tools, getting that connection with nature, where previously they may not have had that social or nature connection. And just in 6 weeks, seeing that transformation in the confidence of them, and even just to the point where they just got out of the minibus and were like, right, going to our area, and they didn't know exactly where they wanted to go, sat down on their logs, and it's almost like that ownership of the site. And I think that's the nice thing, like especially here at Ramsey Heights, is that I think that's where we're a little bit different to other big parks or big locations. It's not to take away the fact that people are still going out in nature, but like Lorna said, you kind of get this space to yourself. So when you come for a little visit, it's quite intimate here, and you kind of feel like you've got the whole place kind of to yourself. You can do a bit of den building, you can do that, and you kind of get that little ownership, like they feel it's their place to come to, and that's quite nice. And we even had a group of young carers who said, we'd love to have our meetings here. We have regular meetings, and this is from like 14 or 15-year-olds saying we'd love to come here and potentially use this site because they felt that connection. To me, those kind of things are really nice to hear. So
yeah, absolutely, because I bet there's not many opportunities for young carers to meet that sounds fantastic, having any kind of a meeting in a nature reserve. I mean, all groups should do that, shouldn't they? Yes. I mean, what a fantastic thing, rather than meeting inside with strip lighting and those fold out tables, to do it outside, like we are here now in this amazing shelter, which is really beautiful. I've never actually been here since this has been built, so this is it's really beautiful space that people can use here, right, to kind of do all kinds of things.
Yeah, we're very lucky.
Yeah, and the birds are flying all around us as well. I think that's the other thing about it not being, like you say, not being too busy, or being here with yourself and nature, is that even with us, a group of people here chatting, there's sort of wildlife flying past and buzzing about. And
the first time I have my group over here, we're going to do sound mapping and do like a get them used to the site. And then the first day I had a group of people doing chainsaws at the back, cutting down loads of trees. Then I had the peacock in the field next door and the donkey and the horse. And I was going, they weren't the sounds I was expecting to hear, but they're still sounds. They're still outside. We're still listening, and all the sounds that we heard were nothing like this. And I was like, but they still lay down. They enjoyed it. And I went, next time we'll hopefully have some more native species flying around. The donkey going peacock. And then we had a cockerel, I think. And I was like, okay. Fair enough.
Might be a bit of a tricky question, but I know that not everyone's reaction to the work that's going on at the Great Fen is necessarily positive. Maybe initially, I don't know. Is there any examples of where you've changed people's minds, from perhaps a negative first impression?
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that people are wary of change. Especially if it's part of the local landscape in which their family has been embedded for generations. So many of the farmers here are sort of third generation farmers, and it might be that their family have actually been farming that land pretty much since it was drained and the farmland was essentially created. So they were quite sceptical about what we were proposing. And people were worried about things like malaria, for instance, which historically was a concern with the fen ague. Things. So we do lots of work we don't shy away from those discussions, and lots of work to address those concerns head on. So, for example, with the mosquitoes, we did quite a lot of research with the Health Protection Agency, looking at whether what we were doing would increase mosquito numbers. Fortunately, it showed that we were more likely to get mosquitoes breeding in an old tyre in your garden than what we were doing, because a healthy wetland also has predators. So that's just one example. I think the most powerful emotional example that I have come across talks back to the Spitfire dig. So there was an elderly gentleman who actually witnessed the Spitfire crash when he was 10. So he knew exactly where it was. He wasn't a great lover of the Wildlife Trust or what we represented in terms of the Great Fen project. And yet he was really interested in the dig. And he came out the day that we lifted the Spitfire to watch what we were doing. And he said, "Oh, you're all right, you folk." And that was the bond, that was the connection. And so you can change hearts and minds. Not everybody's, but you can. And I think people are no longer concerned about being flooded out or what we're doing. They've seen how we operate, they've seen what it means in real terms. And the main thing that we have discussions about now is food security. So we all need to eat. How are we going to do that? And they are usually quite refreshed about how open we are in terms of discussing that. It's like, yes, it is. We recognise it's a really important issue. We recognise we can't shy away from it. But we also recognise that in 50 years, you won't be able to grow food here anyway. So we need to do something collectively. And then we can talk about solutions. And that's one of the reasons we're exploring other alternative food crops as part of our sort of wider research as well.
Mm. Yeah, it is a fascinating thing. Wet farming, the paludiculture, I think it seems like a bit of a sort of intriguing in for people. It's such a kind of concept, a strange concept, isn't it? Or not strange, a different concept to how people imagine farming.
It's very alien to the way that the land is farmed in the UK at the moment. We inherited thousands of years worth of dry farming systems from sort of further south in the world. And especially in a landscape like the Fens, you actually have to spend millions of pounds draining to create the conditions to carry out that sort of farming. So we're sort of constantly fighting against what that land wants to be. But we haven't had 2,000 years of crop development on crops that grow in wetlands. So we're now playing catch up with that very much. And I think as people have become more aware of the issues surrounding climate change, particularly, and carbon, there's a real appetite to move that forward as fast as possible. So there are lots of people working behind the scenes in all sorts of walks of life to try and make wet farming an actual viable alternative option for farmers in their toolkit.
Mm. Yeah, and not necessarily just growing food, though, is it? It's sort of like you were saying earlier about growing reeds, and there's all sorts of interesting things that could work.
Yeah, there's quite a few different crops that we've looked at, some of which are far easier to grow than others. And it would be a whole mixture of things like packaging, single-use packaging alternatives, for example, or building materials, or even fabric for clothing. So there's all sorts of possibilities. and we are working with a huge array of entrepreneurial and highly intelligent and enthusiastic people who are looking at all the possible things we could do so that nothing would be a waste product, even the weeds which are growing in the wet farming crops would have a use. It's just that we all got to get there, and it will be a big change in the system. One of the things that I definitely noticed in the last, I would say, 4 or 5 years even, that climate change went from being a sort of nebulous concept that people discussed that, the world might get warmer, to certainly in our corner of the world, it's got either wetter or drier. So we have really wet periods in the winter, really, really hot, dry periods in the summer. And it feels like suddenly that's really impacted on farmers. So, for instance, 2 years in the last 4, they haven't been able to lift their potato crop because the ground's been too wet. So even if you don't care about climate change from a carbon point of view, or you don't want to change your farming system, or you're not bothered the soil will be gone in 50 years because that's a long way in the future, if you can't harvest your crop this year, then we all need to do something about it. So I think it's bringing diverse people together with a common aim.
Yeah, absolutely. And really good opportunity to then bring people who aren't farmers into that conversation. So is there a kind of aspect of crossover here? Like, are people involved? As you say, there's lots of entrepreneurial people, there's lots of kind of science that goes on. Is there a connection to that for the kind of youth groups or the schools or the other people that are coming here? Do they kind of see that happening in front of them as well as the landscape itself?
Yeah, and I think, like Lorna said earlier, having, different schools coming over, like sixth formers and stuff, we found out that we're appearing in the curriculum. So they're learning about all of these things and desperate to come over now and see the work that's happening and sort of relate it and talk about carbon, sequestering and different things. So, we're thinking now about how we're tailoring our education visits rather than they're just coming over and we just take them for a walk. Is actually how can we make it really impactful? We talked about, looking at the soil cores, different things. What could they come over and actually witness to sort of feel like they're actually taking part? And actually, I think you mentioned as well that, we could actually use some of that data. If we can get them over here doing some testing or soil testing or different things while they're here, we could actually use some of that data so they actually have a really nice impact for them rather than just a visit. Actually, they're contributing in some way. And I think we're thinking about that. We're even changing quickly, thinking, how can we make this more impactful so they feel like they're actually doing something? And I think that's the important thing, is that they study a lot of things at school and feel like they can't do something about it, it's too far away. But actually here, how can we evolve as well to make sure that young people feel like they're getting involved? When we're saying to them, come over and volunteer, we've got something to offer them, or come over with your sixth form. And I think that's a really important journey for them to see, so we can sort of take them to the polluter culture beds, do a bit of a lesson out there and show them what the work that we're doing and see it with their own eyes, rather than us, again, just doing a presentation and saying, this is happening, but you can't get in there and see it. So I think we need to make sure we've got that link. And a lot of them, some of these students are geography students, or they're going into biology, or they're going into something that's related to conservation. And I think that link, like you said, planting that seed and then thinking that potentially they might go off in a career and think that one of their first visits was here in the Great Ven, that's a really nice connection. So
yeah, I do think it's really important for people to understand that, all of the big ideas that are being discussed globally, the international work that's needed, all has to come back to things that are happening locally.
Yeah.
It all starts, doesn't it?
You can make a difference.
Yeah, in your local area, wherever that local area is. Everyone's local area has to be doing something.
Yeah.
And that means, there are things to be done to get involved.
I think it's an important message to young people. I think that they do feel hopeless. They feel like, well, what can I do? These things, like you say, it's so big. It's on the news. It's so big. How do I even start? And that's what we say to them. Just start small. Start with a few things that you can do yourself, and then tell people about what you're doing. Lobby your MPs. Go and take parts. Go and get an interview with a local newspaper. Talk about the things you care about. If you're passionate about it and you want to do it, or you just want to write a blog or an article, then you can send it to us. We can print it or send it. It's just those little things where it's like, just get the message out there. Or just start with recycling in your house, as little as that. But every small thing will make a difference. You don't have to look at it as a big problem that you've got to solve. Just start small, and it does have a big impact, so. Yeah,
absolutely. And what are you most excited about for the future of the project? Whether that's the short-term future, or 10 years or 50 years time. So all three.
Well, there's a question. In the very short term, we're actually going to be breaking ground on our first bit of habitat creation for Peatland Progress after Christmas. And that has been a number of years in the making. So I'm ridiculously excited about the fact we will go out and watch the digger do the first scoop. And we know from doing things similarly before that the minute that you start scooping, the dragonflies come out and the wildlife moves in, and you just add water to a wetland and you get wildlife, and that is enormously exciting. From a purely personal point of view, I've got kids, and so really the satisfaction comes from knowing that we're bequeathing something better to the next generations, which sounds really kind of cheesy and big-headed possibly, but if we don't step up and make a difference, what on earth are we leaving generations down the line? And although, we said at the beginning, it's a big project, it's 3,700 hectares, we were only having a discussion last week about, well, should it be bigger? Is it big enough? Is it impactful enough? And we never stop being ambitious about what we want to achieve, either ourselves or working with partners and other people. So I think it's just exciting what we can do together that we couldn't manage on our own.
Yeah, amazing. What about you, Alison?
Yeah, I think the same. I just think about all the work that we're doing on the project. I mean, we're heavy in sort of planning of what we're going to do over the next few years with the project, but I think I'm very passionate about the engagement that we're going to have with these young people and giving them the opportunities through the project. Grateful to the National Lottery Heritage Fund to sort of enable us to do this. Just thinking about all the people that we're starting on their journey, or people who are coming back to maybe a new direction in their life through the traineeships and internships, being able to get people sort of started on a career path. That engagement with all these students who feel like, again, if they can have some connection here, come out to the Great Fen on a school visit, that they've actually been out here and feel like they've done something. And I just think, one thing we're very guilty of is finding ways to say no, because there's so many positive opportunities here. It becomes a bit addictive because you can see the good in all that we're doing. And like Lorna said, through the connections through art, poetry, music, even possibly, the digital aspect of meeting children halfway. That's how they're consuming data. Obviously, we love the idea of everybody being out in nature and walking around with that, but some technology can enable us and being able to find a way of enhancing what we're doing through some forms of digital technology to engage young people and do things is another opportunity. There's just so many things, and I think I'm so excited about that we're going to they've done great work here in the trust already over, like you say, 25 years since I just think it's an onward journey, and it's only going to get better. We've got so many opportunities to engage young people, and I just find that really meaningful and genuinely purposeful. You said about your personal aspect. I don't have children, but I feel like you've kind of got loads of children here, and I feel like that it's
they're all your children.
I feel like that's exactly but it's like it is. It's because I feel like you're doing something.
It's a little bit like the human time capsules. You're just planting that love of some experience they had in there, and it might not come out again for another 20 years when they've got their own children, and they go, I remember doing this when I was little, and then you just passed it on.
Yes.
So who knows? So I don't think people should worry if they're not kind of some international policymaker or conservationist as a result of coming out here. If you went home loving what you did and you told someone else about it, that's just as important.
Yeah. Fantastic. Well, that's a great note to end on, I think. And I just want to say thank you for sharing your thoughts on the project and your excitement for it. And I'm sure there'll be more podcast episodes from the Great Fen, because there's so much going on here.
Absolutely.
There's so much exciting work to see and to be witness to and to share with people. Fantastic. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you.
Thank you. Thanks again to Lorna and Alison, and to my colleague Holly Wilkinson for the recording support on this episode. If you're interested in visiting the Great Fen, and why wouldn't you be, you can find out more about where to go and explore our active events programme on our website at www.greatfen.org.uk. If you're a National Lottery player, why not join us for a free Signs of Spring guided walk at Woodwalton Fen on Sunday the 16th of March. It's our way of saying thank you for supporting the organisation that funds the Peatland Progress project, and a great way to find out more about this amazing place. There are many more events to look out for too, all through the year. as well as information about the history of the Great Fen, updates on the progress at Speechley's farm, and reports on all the wildlife that's seen across the landscape from our monitoring and research team. If you're not yet a member, please do consider joining the Wildlife Trust. You can find out how to support our work looking after the wildlife and wild places of Beds, Cambs and North Ants at wildlifebcn.org/join. Every member makes a difference. A huge thank you to James Williams and Jared Wentwick for the podcast music. And finally, do listen out for our next In Conservation podcast and let us know what you think by getting in touch on social media at wildlifebcn or dropping us a line from the website wildlifebcn.org/podcast.